If you've been keeping up with politics in Europe lately, you've probably noticed the shift to the right in many countries. Some Western European countries have seen the emergence of what the mainstream media calls far-right or populist parties. We find these terms a bit strange because we hardly ever hear about the far left or extreme left, but it's clear that most of these parties have conservative views with a right-leaning tilt. Plus, a lot of them aren't big fans of the EU and actually want their countries to leave the EU entirely. Hello friends, I hope you're having a fantastic day and welcome to Insight360 Europe edition. In today's video, we'll focus on the political shift to the right that is happening in Europe right now. Why is this happening and what could be the long-term consequences? Let's dive in. In Germany, for instance, the alternative for Germany calls for an exit of Germany from the EU. According to the latest polls, the AfD is projected to receive 19% of the vote, making it the second largest party in the country, only after the also conservative CDU. The significant rise of the AfD in Germany has led to calls from voices across the political spectrum to completely ban the party, in an effort to protect German democracy. France is facing a similar situation with the Rassemblement National Party, which has received 29.4% support in the latest polls, making it the largest party in France by a significant margin. This party strongly opposes EU integration and immigration into Europe. Currently, there is a real possibility that Marine Le Pen could become the next president of France in the upcoming election. The Netherlands, one of the founders of the EU in its current form, recently held their national elections. The PVV party, led by Geert Wilders, emerged as the clear winner, securing 37 seats in parliament and becoming the largest party by a significant margin. The PVV opposes further integration of the EU and advocates for a ban on immigration into Europe, similar to the RN party in France. At the time of creating this video, the PVV party in the Netherlands is attempting to form a government. However, this task is proving to be challenging as many traditional parties are refusing to collaborate with the PVV. This resistance is motivated by a desire to protect democracy, echoing a similar sentiment in Germany. Ironically, this strategy appears to be backfiring, as the latest polls show the PVV with 49 seats, which is almost a third of the entire parliament. To find a party with such high polling numbers in the Netherlands, we have to go back to 1986. Then there is, of course, Italy, which had elections in 2022 that brought Giorgia Meloni to power. She ran on similar themes as Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders. Belgium, Sweden and Austria are also experiencing a strong shift towards a more conservative anti-EU stance among their populations. For many Europeans, years of globalization and left progressive policies brought prosperity and a positive outlook for the future. The credit crisis and the subsequent euro crisis from 2008 to 2010 were followed by years of ultra-low inflation, accompanied by low interest rates and low unemployment. The stock market was booming, and for those who owned real estate, it was a wonderful time. In short, times were good. However, beneath the surface, something was simmering. It seemed that the longer globalization lasted, the smaller the group that benefited from it became. An ever-growing part of society felt left behind, especially blue-collar workers, whose opportunities diminished over time. Jobs were being outsourced to low-cost countries, and wages remained stagnant. This increasing group did not benefit from the stock market or have a booming real estate portfolio. The political class appeared to show complete insensitivity towards the struggles of these individuals. They implemented policies focused on globalization, such as the continuous expansion of the EU, the seemingly unstoppable influx of immigrants, the relentless pursuit of net zero, and ever-growing bureaucracy. None of these things are helpful to the middle class, who are burdened with monthly bills. Furthermore, the political parties that address these issues have been marginalized for years, shaming people into not voting for them. Terms like racism and fascism, along with constant reminders of the events of the Second World War, are used to discourage support for these parties. In countries where these parties found success, they were simply ignored by the establishment. But now something seems to have changed. Whether it was the draconian measures during COVID, the subsequent extreme inflation, or the invasion of Ukraine, it seems many in Western Europe have had enough. The once obscure parties on the right are seeing an enormous influx of support. But is it too late? You see, in the years of building ever larger government organizations on an international level, many binding agreements have been signed into law, many of them without expiration date. The new conservative governments may find that they have much less say in what goes on in their country than they might think, and many Europeans might find out that a lot of their sovereignty has been handed over to non-democratic, technocratic international organizations. Let's take a look at just a few of the hundreds, if not thousands, international binding agreements in play at the moment. Paris Agreement 2015. A global agreement within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, 2018. The first ever negotiated global framework on a common approach to international migration. Valletta Action Plan, 2015. Adopted at the Valletta Summit on Migration, Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, 2016. A free trade agreement between Canada and the European Union. Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in the Economic and Monetary Union, TSDG, 2012. Also known as the Fiscal Compact, European Stability Mechanism, ESM, 2012. A permanent crisis resolution mechanism, banking union, comprising the single supervisory mechanism, SSM, and the single resolution mechanism, SRM, capital markets, union, CMU, an EU initiative aimed at deepening and integrating the capital markets of member states, Stability and Growth Pact, SGP, an agreement to facilitate and maintain the stability of the economic and monetary union, United Nations Convention on Transparency in Treaty-Based Investor-State Arbitration, Mauritius Convention on Transparency, 2014, Council of Europe, Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, Istanbul Convention, 2011, Minamata Convention on Mercury, 2013, an international treaty designed to protect human health, Trade Facilitation Agreement, TFA, 2014, a World Trade Organization, WTO Agreement, Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, 2016, an international agreement to gradually reduce the consumption and production of hydrofluorocarbons, Arms Trade Treaty, ATT, 2013, regulates the international trade in conventional arms, Agreement on the Unified Patent Court, 2013, aims to establish a single patent court covering multiple EU countries, Convention on Cluster Munitions, 2008, prohibits all use, stockpiling, production and transfer of cluster munitions, Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performances, 2012, enhances the rights of performers in audiovisual performances, Nagoya Protocol on access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization, 2010, a supplementary agreement to the Convention on Biological Diversity, United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, 2017. A legally binding international agreement to prohibit nuclear weapons, Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired or otherwise print disabled, 2013. Aims to make it easier for people with print disabilities to access published works. Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, 2018. The first intergovernmentally negotiated agreement prepared under the auspices of the United Nations to cover all dimensions of international migration in a holistic and comprehensive manner. EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, 2018. A trade agreement between the EU and Japan. Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, 2001, with ongoing additional protocols. The first international treaty seeking to address internet and computer crime. Agreement on the Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Waterbirds, AEWA, updates and amendments. Aims to maintain or restore populations of waterbird species which are migratory on the African Eurasian flyway. Basel Convention ban amendment, entry into force in 2019 for new parties. Prohibits the export of hazardous wastes from developed to less developed countries. Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in the Economic and Monetary Union, TSCG, 2012, also known as the Fiscal Compact. Unfortunately, this list continues endlessly. Now, we are not implying that all these agreements are negative. However, the question arises, with all these agreements in place, is there any space left for national democracy? Can countries still govern themselves? It leaves countries with limited room to maneuver and address urgent problems. While scale brings benefits, it also comes at the expense of flexibility. Eventually, the return of scale outweighs its benefits. This is known as the law of diminishing returns, an aspect that most politicians fail to recognize. At an organizational level, this can be visualized as follows. 1. Communication challenges. As organizations grow, the complexity of communication networks increases, leading to inefficiencies and information distortion. 2. Coordination costs. Larger organizations face higher coordination costs to align the diverse functions and departments, leading to delays and increased operational costs. 3. Decreased flexibility. Large organizations often struggle to adapt to market changes quickly due to their complex decision-making processes and bureaucratic structures. 4. Innovation stifling. Large size can stifle innovation due to the organization's tendency to maintain the status quo, resist change, and the lengthy processes for approving new ideas. 5. Cultural dilution. As organizations expand, maintaining a cohesive and strong culture becomes challenging, which can affect employee morale and commitment. Applying these principles to the European Union, for instance, results in something like this. 1. Communication and coordination challenges. The EU consists of member states with diverse languages, cultures, legal systems, and economic priorities. Coordinating policies and actions across such a diverse set of members leads to significant communication challenges and inefficiencies. The complexity of negotiation processes increases with each new member, leading to slower decision-making processes. 2. Decreased flexibility. The EU's regulatory framework and policy-making processes are complex and are slow to adapt to new challenges. The need to reach consensus among member states further reduces the EU's ability to quickly respond to economic crises, geopolitical conflicts, or emerging global issues like climate change. 3. Innovation stifling. While the EU aims to foster innovation through various programs and policies, the bureaucratic nature of its processes slow down the implementation of new technologies or innovative approaches to societal challenges. The balance between regulation and innovation is a fine line to walk, and too much emphasis on one can stifle the other. 4. Cultural and political dilution. Expanding the EU to include more member states dilutes the sense of unity and shared purpose, making it harder to maintain a coherent policy direction. The integration of new members with different political cultures and economic levels also leads to tensions within the Union, affecting its overall cohesion. 5. Principal-agent problem. The EU institutions act as agents for the member states, but aligning the interests of all parties is challenging. The diversity of member states' interests often leads to situations where the actions of the EU institutions do not perfectly align with the preferences of all member states, leading to inefficiencies and compromises that are not optimal. 6. Economies and diseconomies of scale. The EU benefits from economies of scale in areas such as trade negotiations, where its size gives it significant leverage. However, it also faces diseconomies of scale in policy implementation and enforcement, where the costs of administering policies increase with the complexity and diversity of the member states. Anyone who knows about the EU will see these topics, and it seems like many of its citizens are tired of them. But change takes time in a big institution like the EU. Right now, the political establishment within the EU seems to only care about one thing: reaching net zero. However, the European Union is facing some big decisions. The rise of conservative, anti-EU parties in several member states shows that there's a big gap between what the EU is trying to achieve and what many people want. This gap is caused by a mix of things like dissatisfaction with the economy, worries about immigration, inflation, wanting more control over their own countries, and feeling like the EU doesn't understand what life is really like for its citizens. Looking ahead, the future of the EU and its relationship with member states is uncertain. There are various potential outcomes of this growing divide. On one hand, the EU could choose to reinforce its integrationist policies by strengthening its institutions and centralizing decision-making. However, this approach risks intensifying tensions with member states and may result in more countries following the UK's example of Brexit, which could ultimately undermine the Union itself. On the flip side, the European Union could decide to go down the route of reform. This would mean tackling the worries of its citizens by being more open and transparent, giving member countries more control within the Union and focusing on matters that directly affect the welfare of its people. Making these changes would need to be done with caution, keeping the benefits of economic and political unity intact while giving member states the freedom to follow their own approaches in areas like immigration and economic rules. The emergence of conservative, anti-EU parties might also make traditional parties think again about their stances and strategies. This could result in the creation of new alliances and adjustments in policies that are more in line with the current mood of the voters. Consequently, the EU might become more practical, giving importance to adaptability, subsidiarity, and the varying requirements of its member states, instead of strictly pursuing uniformity and centralization. In any scenario, revitalizing the dialogue between the EU and its citizens is crucial. The Union should make efforts to regain trust, foster a sense of belonging, and promote a shared purpose. This can be achieved by addressing the legitimate concerns of its citizens while effectively communicating the tangible benefits of EU membership. If the Union fails to do this, discontent will only grow, and more countries may choose to leave the Union sooner or later. And the question of whether the EU can survive more countries leaving is debatable. That's all for this episode. Let me know what you think of this whole situation in the comments below. If there are any new updates, we will of course keep you informed. We hope you enjoyed this episode and we are really excited to see you again next week. Take care and see you next time.